Well, I'm Hector Woodhouse, or Past Provost, as you'll know from this wee programme, and I was Provost in, long time ago, 1994, 95 and 96.
My name's Ed Morton. I was Provost from February 1997 to February 2000.
Morning, my name's David Ray, and I was the Provost in the year 2000, 2001 and 2002.
Hello, my name is Bruce Jimison. I was Provost from 2003 to 2005. I did actually have 3 marches, but I think I'm the shortest Provost ever to have held the post because I brought the AGM forward and therefore didn't quite make the 3 years as Provost. I think John Cunningham will go down in history as the longest served Provost.
Good morning, Norman Cummings. I was Provost in 2009, 2010 and 2011.
Hello everyone, happy marches 2021. Virtual marches again, but nevertheless some marches. I was Provost from 2011 to 2014.
Hello, I'm Jim Carlin. I'm the most recent Past Provost, and I served as Provost in the marches 2015, 16 and 17. Well, I'll go first, and funnily enough, it's got nothing at all to do with Linlithgow because I was educated at St Mary's Academy in Bathgate. I wondered why all of these pupils who came from Linlithgow and attended St Mary's disappeared in June to some event called the Marches in Linlithgow. And it was a complete, well, it wasn't a complete mystery, but it was only when I moved to Linlithgow in 1980 that I discovered the reason for this enforced absence.
I've got a similar story, Stephanie. I was teaching in Bathgate in 1971 and would come back from Bathgate in time to see the 5 o'clock procession. And I remember saying to Dot, my wife, who's that chap on top of that open top bus? He's looking extremely cheerful, very red-faced, matching his red gown and waving. Is he not the GP that we've just signed the practice of? It was my introduction to a Marches Day, and I'm so glad that I got the introduction. Once I started teaching in Linlithgow, I could attend every one.
Well, mine was 1975, the year that we came to live in Linlithgow. Also the first year that the marches was managed by the Deacons Court. And I came to notice it when I got off the train from work between 5 and 6 o'clock, and hearing the bands, looking down from the station platform into High Street. And that was my first expression. And going along the High Street and seeing all these individuals in red robes. And at that time, I suppose it would have been Doc Wilson, David Cook, Ian Stobie, and Robert Fleming. That was my first introduction to the marches. 1975, the year we moved to Linlithgow.
Well, my first recollection of the marches was in 1956. At that time, I was still staying in Armadale, but my father was working in Bathgate with a colleague, and we were invited down to the marches for the 5 o'clock show. We got down, and it was actually chucking it down, and the procession was going past, and I'm looking at this thinking, what the hell are they doing? I couldn't understand it. Little did I know that in the times to come, that I would be in the front there. And that was my really first experience of the marches, was a wet evening. There it was, but it was still good.
I was born just at the start of the war, so there was no marches right through the war. So I stayed at 6 High Street, which is Peter Kinnan Kidd's office, and the marches went round the fountain. So my first memory was about 1947, when I was 7 years old, watching the marches, the first marches after the war.
I'm going way back to the early 1950s. I think my first memory of the marches would be 1953. the year after I came back from Kenya and was staying at 3 Mile Town. And my first marches was on the back of a St Magdalene's Distillery decorated lorry, which probably set me up for the rest of my life.
Well, like Hector, my first memory of the marches was 1953 as well. I came here as a 9-year-old boy and went to my first crying of the marches from the school. And I remember walking along at the cross and looking up, and there was a guy with a cine camera standing over at the Cunsey Nuke. And I looked, and I'm on that video today, as plain as anything, looking at that camera. So I'm quite pleased to be on the 1953 video. But my memory of the marches was first being woken up with the flutes on marches morning as I came over into Braehead Road. And I jumped out of bed and I watched them coming over the hill, put on my clothes and ran down, and they were congregated at Sandy Merker's, who was a provost at that time. After they were finished at Sandy Merker's, I followed them out to Linlithgow Bridge and came home to tell my parents where I had been. I'd been over at Linlithgow Bridge and I had followed a band, and my mother thought I was telling stories. I always remember that. And also on my first day, going down to that first day, going to the Westport and seeing the dyers and their floats, and the dyers in their cars waving out, and I was hooked. I thought it was the best day ever. I was really hooked for that day.
My most memorable marches, I think I've got two. My first year as Provost, that is something that is really, really special. Yeah, a great memory. But maybe the memory of the marches that will really stick is when my boxer shorts underneath my kilt fell about my ankles. That's a memory.
That's a memory none of us will ever forget, Hector.
That's for sure.
Well, for me, probably also I would have to say is my time as Provost, but really there are too many to mention. I personally was very lucky because my years involved the Olympic Games, the Commonwealth Games, which were important to me, and they were reflected here in Linlithgow, in the Lynn Olympics, etc. But I think my best memory goes back to the days, and I have to say my most enjoyable time in the Deacons Court was on the procession committee. I still believe to this day that the procession convener has the most important job on Marches Day. But for me, it was like an awakening when I happened to be walking behind the Royal Scots. I think it was the Royal Scots who appeared for the first time in my time, anyway, on the court. The pipes and drums, and it really brought home to me that the bagpipes is an incredible musical instrument which is played to varying degrees of ability, and you realise how good and how bad pipers can be until you walk behind a band such as Royal Scots. That, I think, is my most abiding memory of the marches on Marches Day.
The first year I was a Provost was my most memorable marches, because everything was brand new to you. You thought you knew it all, but you didn't really know anything. So that was my most memorable marches. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, my best day was, like the other two, was the first day as the Provost, which really started the night before when we went down to Blackness, as we normally did. Ended up in the lounge with Robert Flemings, and where we managed to get rid of a bottle of whiskey or so. But that was really the start of the day as far as I'm concerned. And then the next morning, Anne and I were up about, I think, 3:30 in the morning to make sure everything was right to meet the flutes, the drums, flutes and drums, the pipes and drums, and the lead band. That was really the bit I really enjoyed. And thereafter, the whole day seemed to be just one happy moment after another. And we eventually got to bed that following day, again about 3 o'clock. So we had almost 12 hours, 24 hours before everything went through. A tremendous day in our life.
I think we'd all agree, Stephanie, that the first year you are provost is perhaps one that sticks in the memory. But it's a nervous day as well, because you're up front, you're leading the parade. When you move, everything moves, and you're on your own. Apart from the occasional advice from the clerk, in my day it was Roy Redwood. No matter how many marches you've been on, when you're leading the parade, it is something quite different.
Well, your first marches is always memorable. And then I've got to recall the Millennium marches, the 2000 marches, when I was proud to be David Ray's speaker. And I proudly looked at the programme to see that somebody hadn't proofread it properly. And it was the 1999 breakfast speaker's name that was in the programme. And I think that the 2019 marches, the military presence at that was something that none of us will ever forget. And then finally, I differ slightly from some of the views already expressed, in that it wasn't my first marches I particularly enjoyed. It was my second, and the reason was that you're so well into the task then. You're much more relaxed, much more in control, able to enjoy the day, as opposed to your first marches when you're nervous, and opposed to your last marches when you're very nostalgic. So at the second, you're in mid-term, you're at the height of your powers, and certainly that would be my memory, my particular memory of being provost.
I suppose, like the guys, your first marches is quite important and good feeling. But one of my big, I've got a few memories, but one has to be evidently Bobby Benny singing My Way at the Cross at the 5 o'clock, which was a highlight of one of my years. But my first marches, as you may recall, was held in the Marquee. The breakfast was held in the Marquee, and after a lot of torment and worrying, it turned out to be quite a good venue, which really is a memory that will stick in my mind, because I thought it was a great place to be for a breakfast. But however, I think the best memory I have, and always will have, I'll never forget it, was, as you know, that the Reed Band play outside your house about 7 o'clock in the morning, and they play a special tune for you. And I remember them playing the Sands of Pharisee. And when I turned round to look at Joy, Jacqueline and Susan, all of us had tears rolling down our cheeks. And it was a very touching and a very emotional time. And I suppose if I look back, and I'm being a bit nostalgic here and maybe a wee bit emotional, I think that 9-year-old boy would never ever have dreamt that one day he would be standing there listening to that and being treated as a provost of the town. And what an honour and privilege it has been to have been that.
Out with the marches, being in the Deacons Court has brought a huge amount of happiness and excitement into all our lives. Hector, I think, would perhaps agree, one of the most amazing was being at the head of 600 flaming torches marching down the high street to the Peel, where the Reed Band played live Handel's fireworks music to a £10,000 firework display by Standard Brock to celebrate the 600th anniversary of the town's charter. That, to me, was an unforgettable experience.
Yeah, lots of stories about that too, Bruce. Eh?
Oh, yes.
It makes me feel proud of Linlithgow and the community that supports the marches.
That's more than 5 words.
5 words?
We'll pick 5 words out of that.
You never could.
Proud of Linlithgow. That's like 5 syllables.
6. I'm proud to be a black bitch.
The words are tradition, heritage, history, legacy, and memories. And you know, this pandemic has been awful, but I think it's hit most of all the children of the town who have missed out on 2 years of that tradition and that history. And that's where what you're doing, recording these memories and all the other virtual marches stuff, is so vital to keep something going, to keep something in the minds of the young people who are the future of the marches. and hopefully next year we'll get back to normal.
I thought
Wow.
Hector couldn't.
Well, for me, Stephanie, 5 words: an honour and a privilege.
Well, I must admit, being part of the Deacons Court is unbelievable.
Well, for me, the 5 words would be excited, nostalgic, proud, humble, thirsty.
I'm surprised, Jim, that Bacchanalian wasn't one of your 5 words.
Mine would be part of a great community.
Here, here.
Drunk. Suppose I've been quite fortunate growing up in the town, and I've had many marches days. I can remember as a boy helping to make paper flowers over at Mrs. Roy's for the mill floats. But unfortunately, because you made flowers didn't mean to say you got on the float. So many memories of marches of trying to get on a float as a boy and being told, no, you're not getting on the float. But that was another thing. It's family get-togethers with your children and waiting on going for lunch and then waiting on the bells ringing and the return of the Provost. At that time, I think it was 6 o'clock when the Provost came back. In fact, it was any time. The Provost decided when he was coming back. So the townsfolk just had to stand at the cross listening to the bells waiting on the Provost. So I have many happy memories, but I suppose my first memory ever riding the marches was the Deacons Court, first year, 1975. And I got an invite for Bill Wilson, Dr. Bill Wilson.
I was fortunate as much. I started to work in the county buildings about 1957. And 2 years later, with my office colleagues, we arrived there in the morning to do the whole day, but just simply in the crowd to watch what was happening. It was really unbelievable what was really happening. But we had a very good day starting at the early morning. We had lunch and then went to the Unicorn. Remember the Unicorn pub? Went there for a while and we came back in time for 5 o'clock, and we then continued after the marches was finished with another pub crawl on the high street. It was a very good, enjoyable day.
For a long while I watched it from the high street like all the rest of the crowd, and then in the 60s Beth and I were married by this time, and I joined the round table, and just in time for them to put in their very first float. I was a joiner to trade, and I got lumber doing all the framework, etc. We put in some fantastic floats, and we nearly won the first prize every year. While I was the deacon for the round table, and when I was the vice chairman of the round table, and Bill Wilson, who was the provost in these days, he asked if I'd like to join the Deacons Court. So that was me in the Deacons Court.
There's no question about it. The way I spent my marches, apart from the wee few years I was on St Magdalene's distillery decorated lorry, then it wasn't really floats as such. But yeah, my first real marches was with the round table way back in about the 1970 or so. Lots of stories there, but that's not the purpose of this wee chat. My first memories were marvellous with the round table.
I spent my time going back. It's related to the first question. Actually, was spent working, and I didn't take the day off until Past Provost Norman asked me to ride the marches as his guest. Thereafter, it was back to work. And then until again Norman asked me to apply to join a court, which I did in 1992. So I suppose it wasn't so much Marches Day as it was my memory. It was Marches Evening when we had a few drinks in the evening. You'll remember that, Norman, no doubt?
Vaguely. A bit misty.
I first moved to Linlithgow in 1980, and at first used to travel over to Bathgate to work until one day back in my flat, which was directly opposite platform 3 and over the pend leading to Jim White's yard. I looked out the window to see a very young Tom Baird in red robes passing in a carriage, so decided to find out more. But then I was invited. I used to drink in those days in what was then called the Armoury, and Jimmy and Kath Haggerty were mine host. And I went along there at 8 o'clock one morning, and that was an end of going to work for the day. And then before I became involved in the marches, I also knew very well Hugh and Alistair Gray, who took over Portcullis, and we used to congregate in the Portcullis and come out to watch the procession out to Linlithgow Bridge and then the procession back. And then after an afternoon of tea and cakes, we would congregate at the cross for the 5 o'clock procession.
My early memory of the marches was being part of the family. We had 3 very young children, 3 all under 4. So we would take them down, stand and wave. I joined the Deacons Court in 1988, thanks to Hector, who invited me to apply. And I was asked in my very first year to speak at the Marquee down in Blackness. I was asked to propose the vote of thanks to the guests. And I remember there was a gentleman, a past Provost of Jedburgh, called Mr. Gideon Yellowlees. That was hard to say at 4:30 on Marches Day.
Only 2 words there, 5 a.m.
Well, that was worth waiting for, Norman.
Yep. Can say no more. Say no more. 5 a.m.
Amazing how many people turn up at that time in the morning, isn't it? I think it speaks highly of tradition.
Fantastic.
I must admit that my favourite time is that in the morning. Being in the waiting for the flutes, the drums come out 5 o'clock, followed by the pipes and drums, and then followed by the reed band. That to me was the real part that I enjoyed, and being able to get out in amongst the people, talking to the people, and talking to an awful lot of friends and people I didn't really know, but it was a tremendous time. So the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock time in the morning was my best time, I think.
I think I would agree with David. The camaraderie, the friendship, the meeting people. But maybe because I'm a teacher, maybe because I like public speaking, I like the speeches. I follow the speeches avidly at the breakfast, at Linlithgow Bridge, in the Marquee at Blackness. And then after the marches is over, every night we congregate in my garden, and my lawyer son and I discuss, dissect, analyse all the speeches we'd heard that day, what they meant, who were the best, who was the longest, and really, really enjoy looking back over everything that's been said on Marches Day.
Yeah, I think I would agree with all of that. I don't know if I have a favourite part of Marches Day. All of the things that have been mentioned, of course, in their own way, but somebody mentioned camaraderie, and we mustn't forget the Civic Week as a whole. For me, the best part of the Civic Week are the Deacons' Nights, because that's when the organisations of the town come together. Marches Day is very much a celebration of history. I think the Deacons' Nights are a celebration of the here and now, because they are live, they're people interfacing with one another. And as somebody said, the marches and in Deacons' Nights in particular are the glue which binds the community in Linlithgow. So for me, Marches Day obviously and all the things that happen, but the Deacons' Nights are for me the most enjoyable.
7 o'clock at the West Port on Marches morning, and it's something you tend to miss when you're Provost, because you just can't, you don't have time to be there. But I think when the reed band strike up and play Crimmin, it's an incredibly emotional time. And of course, everybody remembers people who are no longer with us and able to enjoy Marches Day. And then in contrast is the sound of the reed band, who then strike up to the tune Earl of Murray and march down the high street. That's incredibly emotional. But like Norman too, and I think Jack followed Norman and I followed Norman by having the reed band play the Sands of Arisaig outside the house when they marched up here on Marches morning. And to hear an assembly of 60 musicians strike up that wonderful tune is really very emotional. And if I can cheat and add another favourite part of the day, and that is the solemnity that is the ceremony at the War Memorial at Blackness. And I think people who ride the marches for the first time are taken aback by the contrasts in the day. There are some really very poignant moments, and as I say, two of those are 7 o'clock in the morning at the Westport and at the War Memorial in Blackness.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to agree with Jim that there are many favourite bits of the Marches Day, but the one probably is the most favourite for me is 7 o'clock in the morning at the Westport, and probably 5 to 7. They play Crimond, the emotion there. Things I can remember, in fact, a number of years ago, the Glasgow Herald had a reporter, and in the reporter on Marches Day, he had the little phrase about the 7 o'clock and the playing of Crimond. And there was an old man standing beside me, he said, with tears in his eyes. Guess who that old man was? But then the reed band strike up the Murray Firth. Oh my goodness me, that is the start of the marches to me. What emotions.
The procession going out to the bridge and coming back, because I was either at the front, a walk at the front of the procession with the flag bearers, because I know an awful lot of the people on the high street, and just seeing all the people that I've known for all my life really. When you get to the Westport and see them all at the old folks' home, that's where I should be, I think. So that's my favourite part, is and coming back, especially when you've got the robes on and you're walking down the high street. It's very touching, I think.